Hello, welcome to the channel Y Stories. Enjoy watching.
Mommy, there's a boy crying over there. Let's buy him a bun. The woman almost fainted when she saw an exact copy of her daughter. It was a wonderful May day. The air was filled with the scent of flowers, and the mood was festive, as it often is in May. Daniela Lacayo was walking along the picturesque park alley, holding tightly to the hand of her 7-year-old daughter, Esther. A beautiful young woman in a light, elegant pantsuit. A pretty little girl with long chestnut hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders, a light sundress highlighting her naturally tan skin, and her face adorned with huge eyes of an amazing turquoise hue. Esther resembled a beautiful doll. Daniela often admired her daughter, and she wasn't the only one. Even now in the park, passers-by were looking at them. Esther had long been accustomed to these glances. Daniela had even been offered to make her daughter a model, with people saying the little girl would find success in that field, but the young mother refused. Let the child have a childhood. When she grows up, she'll decide what she wants to do, but for now, it's better for her to focus on play, learning about the world, and studying. Esther had inherited the best traits from her parents, Daniela and Alfonso. People often said it would be good for the couple not to stop at one child since they made such beautiful ones. Esther needs a brother. Those who didn't know the story of Daniela and Alfonso said this. And those who did were, of course, much more tactful, understanding that the mention of a second child was like a sharp knife for Daniela. What she went through 7 years ago, not everyone could bear, but Daniela had to. She had to pull herself together and return to life. Esther pulled her through it. The girl needed a healthy, sane mother, so Daniela pulled through. Her daughter saved her, and Alfonso, of course. Now, looking at the happy young woman with her beautiful little daughter, no one would think she had a tragedy in her past. Daniela didn't share the details with new acquaintances. Why would she? Especially since recalling the events of 7 years ago was still hard, but she had to remember. Mom, will I be able to buy a doll with this money? Esther asked. And a Lego set for girls? We'll see, Daniela smiled at her excited daughter. Esther had recently had her birthday, she turned 7. Friends and relatives had given the girl money, and now they were heading to the toy store to choose gifts from generous guests. Esther had been looking forward to this day, a day off when her mom could take her to the supermarket. They also planned to visit an ice cream cafe. 7 years. Her daughter's birthday was, of course, a huge celebration for Daniela, but with a tinge of sadness, sorrow, and longing. Because on this day, exactly on this day, everything had happened, happiness and tragedy. Alfonso also felt the events particularly acutely during their beloved daughter's celebration. A memorable date, no doubt. For several years now, the couple hadn't talked about those events on Esther's birthday, unlike before. Both displayed nothing but unclouded happiness in front of their daughter, showing only joyful emotions. Esther was supposed to have a celebration, and she didn't need to know anything yet. Later, of course, they would tell her, but their daughter would already be grown up, strong, and wise. Not now. Mom, can I go on those swings? Esther pointed to the playground in the middle of the park. There were already at least several dozen children playing there. Daniela smiled again. She knew this would happen. She knew they would have to make a stop. Esther could never pass by this place calmly. Of course, go play. I'll wait for you here on the bench. A happy Esther dashed to the swings. They were miraculously free despite the crowd. Daniela watched her daughter. Esther looked like a light, graceful butterfly, so delicate, so beautiful, so tender. It seemed like she lacked grounding, strength, sturdiness. Daniela wished there was someone by her child's side to protect and guard her. Her heart ached again. This was how it was meant to be by nature, a delicate, airy girl, and with her. No, it was too painful to think about, too hard to remember even now. Will this longing ever go away? Will Daniela ever stop thinking about what could have been? To distract herself from sad thoughts, Daniela took out her phone and checked the girlfriend's chat. It was always fun here, with Daniela's friends sharing news, sending funny pictures, and cheering each other up. Daniela replied to a couple of messages, liked a photo of Rosa's new pet, a baby black raven. Her friend claimed that these were the smartest birds in the world. You could even teach them to talk, which Rosa and her son were trying to do. Rosa always had a knack for originality, and Daniela loved her for it. "Mom," a small voice pulled Daniela out of her cozy world. "What is it?" Daniela looked at her daughter with concern. Esther's carefree, cheerful eyes were now frightened, confused, all at once. "Mom, there's a boy. He's all alone, very small, and he's really hungry. He asked an old man for a bun, but the man yelled at him and chased him away. I feel sorry for him, Mom. Can we buy him a bun, please?" "What a story. Well, show me this boy." Esther grabbed her mom's hand and led her towards the summer stage. "He's hiding behind the stage. That mean man scared him." Daniela immediately thought of a little gypsy or a street urchin in dirty old clothes. There were too many such children, unfortunately. Their parents drank, and they grew up like weeds, hungry and getting into trouble. There he is. Daniela saw a thin child, unexpectedly well-dressed. He was about the same age as Esther. The boy was sitting right in the grass, hugging his knees, his back to Daniela and Esther. He didn't notice them approaching, lost in his own thoughts. It was strange. Daniela was well-versed in children's fashion. This boy, who according to her daughter was starving and begging for bread on the street, was dressed in a branded t-shirt and expensive denim shorts. Such clothes were sold in stores that Daniela only visited during maximum sales. "Hey," Esther ran to the boy, "don't be scared. I brought my mom. She won't let that old man come near us." The boy turned and looked at Daniela. The woman gasped. This child had huge eyes of a rare turquoise shade, just like Esther's. It was Danilo. No, of course, Danilo couldn't be a boy, but somehow he looked just like him. Danilo still appeared to Daniela in her dreams. She knew every feature of his face, and now an identical boy was standing right in front of her. Daniela examined the boy, not missing a single detail, and found more and more similarities to her daughter. Esther, standing next to him, made the comparison even starker. They looked like characters from a puzzle book series. Find 5 differences. There were very few differences. The boy and girl resembled each other so much that it couldn't just be a coincidence. "Are you hungry?" Daniela finally managed to ask. The boy immediately nodded. He was also examining Daniela with interest and surprise, as if trying to remember or understand something. "And what's your name, boy?" "Lucio," the boy answered. Daniela was ready to hear a different name, Danilo. But the voice of this child sounded exactly like the voice of the boy from her dreams, like the voice of her son. Daniela was born and raised in a strong but not very wealthy family. Her mother worked as a nurse at a clinic, and her father was a driver. They lived in a small 2-room apartment in a 5-story building, never starved but didn't live lavishly either. Daniela was encouraged to aim for a better future. "You'll study to be an economist, get a job at a bank, and become a wealthy lady," her mother dreamed, looking at her girl. "It's about time someone in our family got a higher education and made something of their life," her father echoed. "Who if not you? You've got brains." Daniela did have brains. Studying came easily to her. No, Daniela was never a straight A student, but she wasn't a C student either. She graduated with good grades, did well on her exams, and got into her desired program, the financial and economic faculty of the local university. Her parents were overjoyed, and Daniela was happy too. However, the career of an economist never attracted her. Daniela liked working with small children. She would have loved to be a preschool teacher, but her mother dissuaded her. "You'll be wiping other people's children's noses all your life. It's a thankless job. Children can be a handful, and their parents are even worse. No, daughter, you'd better choose another profession." Well, Daniela agreed, trusting her parents' experience. During her second year of studies, at a student disco, Daniela met her future husband, Alfonso. Of course, she didn't know then that the handsome, smiling guy would become her life partner. By that age, Daniela already knew she was attractive, tall, slim, big-eyed. But there were girls in her group who were even more eye-catching, the pouty-lipped Liliana or the voluptuous Violetta. So Daniela was genuinely surprised when the charming young man approached her. And not empty-handed, he was holding out a red rose. Where did he get it from? He must have dashed to the flower kiosk across the street from the university. How thoughtful. This alone was endearing. "Hello, miss," the guy said, a little shyly. "My name is Alfonso. I saw you and, well, you're so beautiful. May I ask you for a dance?" Such simple and sincere words. Daniela blushed slightly and looked down. The guy was waiting for an answer. It was clear he was very nervous, and then Daniela looked into his face and met eyes, large eyes of a rare turquoise shade, beautifully set against his slightly tanned face. These eyes looked at Daniela with genuine admiration. It made her head spin. "Invite me to dance, Alfonso, I allow it." Daniela smiled and accepted the flower. "The rose is incredibly beautiful." "As are you," the guy smiled more confidently, then pulled Daniela close and spun her in a dance just as a slow song started playing. They left the university right after that dance, walked around the city at night, laughed, told each other about themselves, getting to know each other. Alfonso came from a family similar to Daniela's. His mother was also a nurse, but his father was a factory worker. And Alfonso's parents, like Daniela's, dreamed of higher education for their son. "That's why I'm a future engineer," Alfonso smiled. "And do you think it's your calling?" "Yes, definitely. I enjoy studying, but I love the practical work even more. I chose the right profession." "But I haven't, it seems." Daniela shook her head, admitting this to someone for the first time. "I think I would love working as a preschool teacher. I prefer children over reports and numbers." "It shows. You have kind eyes," Alfonso said very seriously, and after those words, he pulled Daniela close and kissed her. Since then, they were hardly ever apart. Daniela felt she had found her person, someone dear, reliable, loving, and beloved. They were comfortable and happy together, understood each other without words, felt each other from a distance, even read each other's thoughts. At least, that's how it seemed to Daniela sometimes. Alfonso introduced Daniela to his parents. Daniela's mother and father also met Alfonso. The older generation approved of their children's choice. Everything was going so well that it was hard to believe. Sometimes it seemed too good to be true, and other times it felt like it couldn't have been any other way. So, in their third year, Alfonso and Daniela got married. At that time, Alfonso was already working part-time at his father's factory, sometimes even taking night shifts, so they had money for rent and lived off their stipends. They were no strangers to saving and scrimping, so neither of them suffered much. This didn't stop them from dreaming of a bright future together, of course. They planned to graduate from university, get their diplomas, find good jobs, build their careers, and become more financially stable, allowing them to afford much more. Daniela and Alfonso decided not to rush into having children. They both dreamed of a large family with at least 3 children. But that would come later. First, education, career, getting on their feet. They, as adults, could live on pasta and sausages, and if money was tight, juice and a bun would do. But a child needed much more. Daniela felt happy in their cozy nest with Alfonso. Her beloved was nearby, understanding her like no one else, trying to fulfill her every wish. She also tried to make his life easier and more pleasant. There was so much good ahead, interesting work, children, a long life together. The news of the pregnancy was a complete surprise for the newlyweds. They hadn't planned on becoming parents so early, both were just over 20, but it happened. "And what will we do?" Daniela asked her husband, knowing perfectly well what his answer would be. She had no doubts about her life partner. What do you mean, what? We'll have the baby, raise it, love it, Alfonso smiled, hugging his young wife tightly. Then, in a gentle voice, he quoted a famous cartoon, "I was happy before, but now I'll be twice as happy." The pregnancy was difficult. In the early stages, Daniela suffered from severe morning sickness. She couldn't eat anything, as it would immediately come back up. Already delicate, Daniela became even more frail. Alfonso worried about his wife, cooking delicious meals especially for her, but she couldn't even look at them. Alfonso was exhausted, trying to please his beloved, but to no avail. Daniela was wasting away before his eyes. He accompanied her to every prenatal appointment. "It's okay, it's not necessary," Daniela would protest. "Can I go on my own?" "You should rest, you have a shift in the evening and a report to prepare." "Of course, you can't go on your own, the wind would blow you away," Alfonso joked. "You've become so thin that even a little draft is enough." The doctor said that such severe morning sickness was not normal. Yes, pregnant women might get nauseous in the mornings, but Daniela couldn't eat anything except oranges and tangerines. They admitted her to the hospital for a more thorough examination, and the cause of her poor health was quickly found. It turned out that Daniela was pregnant with twins. A slender young girl, and now there were 2 babies. Consequently, the hormonal changes and the strain on her body were just enormous. Twins. Daniela almost fell off the examination table when the ultrasound doctor gave her the news. Her first emotion was joy. She felt as if she had won a prize in the lottery. She was going to have 2 children at once. What a miracle! Then came fear. Carrying twins to term would be difficult. She was already feeling so sick early on. What about later? How would she manage 2 babies at once? What if they cried together and she was alone with them? What about money? They hadn't planned on having children so early precisely because they had so little money, and now there would be 2, meaning more expenses. What to do? Alfonso, who came to visit his wife, was simply overjoyed, genuinely, without any fears or worries. "We wanted many children, and now we have 2 at once. We're so lucky. We'll manage everything." The future father even started dancing in the hospital lobby out of happiness. People around them smiled at him. Daniela caught her husband's optimism, and a clear understanding came to her. Together, they would definitely manage. Daniela was prescribed vitamins and given hormone shots. Her condition improved, and she was allowed to go home. Alfonso treated her like a delicate vase. Daniela took full advantage of her situation. She ordered her favorite dishes and stopped bothering with cleaning. Why not? When else would she get the chance to be so lazy? She was no longer afraid. Parents on both sides promised to help with the babies so their mother and father could finish their studies. The grandparents even planned their vacations to ensure someone was always available to help. The day they were to learn the babies' genders at the ultrasound became a celebration for the whole family. Almost everyone showed up at the medical center, both future grandmothers, Alfonso and Daniela. The grandfathers couldn't get off work. However, only the young parents entered the room while the support team waited outside. Daniela and Alfonso turned the screen so that everyone could see their babies. The future mother and father gazed in awe at the tiny figures. "They're beautiful," Daniela murmured. "Yes," agreed the unflappable ultrasound technician. "I can definitely see that. They really are beautiful babies and surprisingly healthy. It's rare these days to see such perfect babies, like straight out of a textbook." Alfonso and Daniela exchanged glances. Their babies were healthy. That was the most important thing, of course, but they were eager to know the genders. "And what are they?" Alfonso asked the question that interested both of them. "Boys? Girls?" "You're lucky here too," the technician allowed herself to smile. "You're having royal twins." "What does that mean?" the future parents asked in unison. "We're not exactly of royal blood," Alfonso joked. "Celebrate, Mom and Dad, you have a boy and a girl, the complete package." Not everyone gets so lucky. You wouldn't believe the dramas that unfold on this table when I announce the gender isn't what the parents were hoping for, but you have both. Yay! Exclaimed Alfonso. His exclamation, of course, was heard by the grandmothers waiting by the door. One of them, Daniela's mother, cautiously peeked into the room. Is everything all right here? Couldn't be better, the ultrasound technician replied. Rejoice, you have both a grandson and a granddaughter. Choosing names for the children was easy for Alfonso and Daniela. They decided to name the girl Esther after Daniela's great-grandmother and the boy Danilo after Alfonso's beloved grandfather. Oh, how joyful the waiting became after the ultrasound. The parents felt as if they had met their children. Daniela now shopped for blue and pink items, quietly preparing a wardrobe for her little ones. When someone asked who they were expecting, Daniela proudly replied, a son and a daughter. People were surprised, congratulated them, and smiled. Daniela's belly began to grow quickly after that memorable ultrasound. It was hard for slender Daniela to carry such a load, but she didn't complain. After all, she was expecting twins, and naturally, 2 babies weigh more than one. Alfonso took on additional work to save up for everything they needed for the children. There was so much they needed: clothes, cribs, twin strollers, and such things weren't cheap. And then, as luck would have it, Daniela was given a concerning diagnosis: the risk of premature birth. This often happens with twins, the doctor explained to the young parents. And the mother is so slender and young. The main thing is to carry them at least to the 35th week. By then, the babies are almost fully developed, and it's not as risky. Daniela was even admitted to a private medical center for observation. The young family wasn't charged, as the young patient was accommodated under a special program. The director of the women's clinic where Daniela was being monitored went out of her way to help the young parents. Daniela was under the care of an experienced doctor, Magdalena Perez, a well-groomed, calm woman in her early 40s with very attentive eyes in which Daniela noticed a hidden sadness. Daniela had always been keen on noticing such things since childhood. Senora Perez was considered an excellent specialist and prescribed the right therapy for Daniela. The abdominal pain stopped immediately, and the threat of early labor was brought under control, but still, the expectant mother was advised to rest more and not lift anything heavy. Take care, rest, think about your babies, Senora Perez would smile at her young patient. She only smiled with her lips, her eyes remained sad. Daniela quickly got used to the hidden sorrow in her doctor's eyes, although at first she thought that Senora Perez was worried about her and her babies. This was very frightening. Alfonso visited the center almost every day, sharing news with Daniela and showing photos of their apartment. Daniela was on bed rest until the very end of her pregnancy. This meant that the young father had to prepare the home for the arrival of 2 new residents on his own, and Alfonso managed splendidly. Daniela looked at the photos of the nursery. How cozy and beautiful it was. 2 cribs along the wall, made up with beautiful bedding, a dresser with a changing table, a laundry basket shaped like a toy bunny, and a night light. The night light was a starry sky projector. Alfonso had thought of every little detail. It was so touching, so heartwarming. I want to go home so badly, Daniela almost cried, looking at the beauty on her husband's smartphone screen. Better not rush it, he smiled. Let everything happen at the right time. The babies aren't ready yet. I'm so tired of lying here. Every day is the same, and I miss you. I promise, soon we'll have lots of fun, Alfonso laughed. For now, just rest. You're right, Daniela smiled. Alfonso always managed to lift her spirits. But despite the doctor's efforts, led by Senora Perez, and Daniela's carefulness, labor began prematurely, much too early. When Daniela's water suddenly broke, she was terrified, even feeling faint. She understood perfectly what this meant. Now the labor couldn't be stopped, and the babies were still too immature, not ready. Daniela ran to the nurse's station in tears. The nurses knew the young girl's situation with twins, understood immediately, and called the doctors. Fortunately, Senora Perez was on duty. Daniela was wheeled to the delivery room on a gurney. "What will happen now?" Daniela cried. "You're going to have your babies now. It's all right, they are already quite viable. Stay strong." The next few hours were filled with fear and pain, and then only pain remained. Daniela doubled over, dark spots flashing before her eyes, her head spinning, wishing for it all to end quickly. At some point, Daniela didn't even care what would happen to her babies, as long as the excruciating pain would stop. She missed Alfonso's presence so much. Senora Perez periodically checked on Daniela, praised her, and urged her to hold on. At the same time, she was attending to several other deliveries. The midwives were also busy, running between patients. Daniela was afraid. She feared that when the time came, no one would be there. Senora Perez would briefly examine her each time and say it wasn't time yet. "Not much dilation, you'll need to hold on a bit longer." Daniela couldn't imagine suffering for several more hours. She felt she wouldn't make it. Finally, the pain became so unbearable that Daniela couldn't hold back a scream. At that sound, a tired midwife peeked into the delivery room, examined Daniela, nodded with satisfaction, laid the exhausted patient on the couch, and ran to get the doctor. "Well?" Senora Perez smiled as she arrived. "Are we ready to give birth? Now you need to work a little. Listen to me carefully and follow my instructions." Daniela followed, obediently doing everything Senora Perez said. The doctor's calm and confidence were very encouraging. Daniela trusted her doctor completely. With Senora Magdalena there, everything would go well. Daniela didn't notice when two more doctors appeared in the delivery room. As she later learned, they were neonatologists. After all, two premature babies were about to be born, and they would need immediate help. Danilo was born first, tiny and bright red, announcing his arrival with a loud cry. "Great guy," the midwife smiled. "Amazing," one of the neonatologists said while examining the baby. "I haven't seen such strong babies in a while, especially not premature ones. A real little warrior." "Don't celebrate too soon," Senora Perez shook her head. "The term is so short, we don't want to jinx it. And you, Daniela, let's go. We still have work to do. It's time to deliver your daughter." Daniela heard the words about her firstborn, how healthy and strong he was, and heard his loud, demanding cry. He was fine, strong, and he would live. What happiness! Now for the daughter. Esther was born right after her older brother. She was much smaller than Danilo and, instead of being red, had a purplish hue. Daniela waited for her daughter's cry to join her son's, but Esther was silent. The neonatologists were working over her on a separate table while Senora Perez attended to Daniela. "What's wrong with her? Why is she silent?" The new mother tried to see her child, but it was difficult from her position on the bed. "Is she alive?" "We're taking the baby to the ICU," one of the neonatologists said sharply, wrapping the tiny girl in a towel and rushing out the door. Daniela had just a moment to marvel at how small the bundle in his hands was. "And I'm taking her brother to intensive care," said the second doctor. "He's still premature. We need to observe him." "Senora Perez, what's wrong with my daughter?" Daniela continued to ask questions. She was close to panic. "Nothing is clear yet," Magdalena answered curtly. She looked very tired and even more sad than usual. "The doctors will take care of the babies. They are very premature, anything can happen. We will do everything possible. The boy is healthy." "He is strong and healthy," Daniela said. "The boy will survive for sure. I saw him, and everyone said he was strong. But what about my little girl? Please save her." "The doctors will do everything possible for both of them," Senora Perez repeated, then turned to the midwife. "Finish up with her yourself. I have 2 more deliveries on this floor about to happen." Daniela didn't even realize how she managed to fall asleep. She must have been very tired. Troubled thoughts tormented her, tears filled her eyes, and her heart ached for her tiny daughter. Daniela was hardly worried about her son. He was born such a strong boy and cried loudly, which meant his lungs were fine. But little Esther. Without noticing, Daniela slipped into darkness, temporarily freeing herself from her anxious thoughts. She woke up in the ward, probably brought there on a gurney. The belly, which the young mother had already gotten used to, was gone. Daniela immediately remembered everything that had happened to her the day before and pressed the call button for the doctor. Senora Perez did not appear immediately. Daniela had to wait a bit. When she entered the room, she sat on the edge of Daniela's bed and looked at her with a strange expression. Her eyes held many emotions: sadness, sympathy, and guilt. It seemed like there was guilt too. "What about my daughter?" Daniela asked immediately. It seemed like she never cried. "Did she survive?" Magdalena nodded. "The girl was born very weak. She's in intensive care on a ventilator, but the prognosis is good." Daniela exhaled. Esther had pulled through, which meant everything would be fine. She would need some time to recover, but it was manageable. "Daniela, there's trouble with your boy," said Senora Perez. "What?" But he was fine. This was the last thing Daniela expected to hear. He was fine at first. Premature babies are always full of surprises. You never know what to expect. His breathing stopped, and he was moved to intensive care. "We tried to save him, but..." Senora Perez spread her hands and lowered her eyes. Darkness engulfed Daniela. Later she learned that she had lost consciousness. The truth was so horrifying that the new mother preferred to shut down. "Oh, you're awake," said an elderly woman in a white coat, bustling around Daniela's ward. Daniela recognized her. It was the midwife who had been present at the birth of her children. "I can't believe it," Daniela said. "I understand, dear," the midwife replied, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I was surprised too. I saw your boy. He was good, strong, loud. Such babies usually cling to life fiercely, but with premature ones, anything can happen. I had already gotten used to having 2 of them. How can this be? You will have 2, maybe even 3, considering how young you are. Don't worry about the boy too much. Be happy that they managed to save your daughter. She was on the edge, but she pulled through. What a little fighter. She'll be fine now. Can I see her? I'll take you to see her a bit later. She can't be taken out of the incubator yet. Once you're feeling better, I'll take you. And, can I see the boy? Oh, no, dear. Why tear your heart out? You're still unwell, it's not necessary." Daniela stayed in the hospital for several more weeks. Danilo was buried without her. The young mother tried to follow the midwife's advice, to rejoice in her living daughter and not grieve for her son. But she couldn't help it. It felt as if a part of her heart had been cut out and taken away. Daniela didn't feel whole anymore. Something was always missing. Esther quickly recovered, gaining weight well. Soon, mother and daughter were moved into the same room. Caring for her baby and being close to her daughter was comforting. Daniela even started to smile. It was impossible not to smile when such turquoise eyes, like Esther's, looked at her so attentively and trustingly. Danilo was buried without Daniela. She never saw her boy because Senora Perez didn't allow her to leave the hospital. "You can't go. You're very weak and need to be under medical supervision. What if you start bleeding or something else happens? I won't sign the permission. Don't even ask. Think about your daughter." Daniela didn't want to imagine how her husband dealt with the grief. He organized the funeral alone, removed the extra crib from the nursery, and hastily sold the twin stroller they had worked so hard to get. Of course, it was very difficult for him, but he stayed strong for his wife. Danilo appeared to Daniela in her dreams the very first night after the tragedy. She recognized him immediately, even though she had only seen her son briefly in the delivery room. A beautiful baby with lovely round cheeks and very intelligent eyes, of course, bright turquoise like his father's and sister's. Then came the discharge, festive despite everything, with flowers, balloons, photos, and smiles from the relatives. Everyone tried their best to stay strong and hide their true feelings. Daniela tried not to think about the fact that there should have been 2 babies, 2 bundles, not 1. It didn't work very well. Time passed. Esther grew. Grandparents from both sides really helped a lot with their granddaughter. The young parents graduated, got their diplomas, and found jobs. Daniela was hired as an accountant at a travel agency, and Alfonso became an engineer at the same factory where his father worked and where he himself had worked part-time as a student. Initially, their salaries were not very high, but things got better, and Alfonso was eventually appointed head of the engineering department. Soon the family was able to buy their own apartment, even if it was through a mortgage, but still. It was a spacious 3-room apartment in the city center. "We will have more children, we need a lot of space," Alfonso smiled. And Daniela, she remained silent. She always stayed silent now when Alfonso talked about having more children. They no longer had the complete mutual understanding they once did. The couple dealt with the tragedy differently. Alfonso had come to terms with it over time, almost recovering from his grief. He hadn't forgotten Danilo, no, but he dreamed of having more children, new ones, and he looked to the future. Daniela, on the other hand, was afraid, very afraid of a repeat. And then Danilo appeared to her often, almost every night. The most amazing thing was that he didn't stay a baby. He wasn't the tiny infant Daniela had seen briefly that one time. No, Danilo grew and changed along with his sister. When Esther turned 3, she was a serious, curious little girl with bright big eyes and a head of chestnut, slightly curly hair. When Esther turned 5, Danilo had grown from a toddler into a tall, skinny boy, tousled and mischievous. Daniela initially told Alfonso about these dreams, and not just Alfonso, her parents, friends, colleagues. She shared these strange dreams with many, but people reacted the same way. "Don't break your heart, let him go," her mother urged. "Daniela, that's enough. It's time to move on," Alfonso pleaded. "Listen, you can go mad like this," Yolanda, her best friend, said anxiously. No one understood or realized that these dreams didn't make Daniela feel worse, quite the opposite. Seeing the boy made her feel warm inside. She felt a strange confidence that this child was living some kind of life, a pleasant, full, bright life. These thoughts made things a bit easier. And now, behind the summer stage in the tall grass, Daniela saw that very boy from her dreams in real life. Esther held his hand, gently patting his shoulder, while he stood there, so thin, so tense like a drawn string. It seemed one wrong move and the boy would run away. Daniela somehow had no doubt that he could run fast. Esther. Next to him, she looked so natural and organic. It seemed like here was the missing piece, the delicate, beautiful girl and the strong and also very beautiful boy, the complete set, the royal twins. But this little boy was called Lucio, not Danilo. "So, Lucio, you're hungry?" Daniela asked. "Yes, to be honest." "Mom will buy us buns," Esther said to him, and then her eyes lit up with a new idea. "Can you take us to a cafe?" "I don't need presents, let's go to the cafe with Lucio instead." What a great idea, Daniela agreed. She thought that in the cafe, in a relaxed setting, the child would open up, calm down, and tell them more about himself. The woman didn't believe it was just a coincidence. Strangers couldn't look so much alike as Lucio and Esther. "Magdalena, there's a delivery from the warehouse. Can you oversee the reception?" Magdalena sighed, regretfully tossed her unfinished cigarette into the trash, and hurried into the store. She had been working here as a saleswoman for almost a year now, an exhausting and thankless job, sometimes rude customers, shortages at the cash register, and the meager salary. Magdalena had always dreamed of being a doctor, saving lives, making people healthy. She had worked hard to achieve her dream, first excelling in school, then 7 long years in medical school, and finally, a diploma embodying her hopes and plans. She chose obstetrics and gynecology as her specialty, practicing in a maternity hospital where she fell in love with the profession. It was a wonderful miracle to witness new lives. The feeling when everything turned out well was indescribable, as if the world brightened, as if wings grew behind her back. And it was always like that, the impressions never faded, which was amazing. Magdalena loved that feeling, loved seeing the tears of joy in the eyes of new mothers, hearing the first victorious cry of a new human being entering this world. Of course, an obstetrician-gynecologist's practice had its challenges, including difficult births and even tragedies, but even in these cases, a qualified doctor was indispensable, especially in such cases. Magdalena devoted herself entirely to her work, spending days and nights at the clinic, having delivered countless babies. She didn't remember all the babies she had delivered, but many of them she did. Sometimes, only Magdalena's intuition and skilled hands saved newborns from serious birth injuries. Their mothers never realized how close they had come to holding a disabled child instead of a healthy one. Time flew by unrelentingly. Magdalena was almost 40 and still hadn't started her own family. When? There was always either studying, training courses, or working from morning till night. But eventually, the time came when Magdalena longed to experience the joy of motherhood herself, but there were no suitable candidates for fatherhood around. She could have started an office romance, but that was always risky, especially if a child resulted from such a union. No, work had to remain work. So, Magdalena went to a bar, met a handsome, tall guy who was about 7 years younger, an ideal candidate for a father. A hot and passionate affair ensued. Magdalena didn't have deep feelings for this young man, she only needed a child. But the desired pregnancy didn't happen. Magdalena realized she needed to get checked. She had never thought something might be wrong with her, but the tests clearly showed there were serious problems. The diagnosis practically ruled out natural motherhood. So, Magdalena decided on IVF with donor biomaterial. This was even better, her child would have only her. The father would be unknown, and no one would claim rights to the child. It didn't work the first time, and several attempts were necessary. During her quest for a child, Magdalena discovered her interest in reproductive medicine. So many women had conception problems nowadays, Magdalena could be the one to fulfill their cherished dream. Eventually, the pregnancy happened. Magdalena was over the moon with happiness, and when she found out she was expecting a girl, she was even more delighted. She felt that raising a boy alone would be nearly impossible, but a girl was a different story, something she was familiar with. Marta was born a little prematurely. Magdalena wasn't worried about this, knowing very well that even more fragile babies were taken care of, and Marta was a sturdy little one. While on maternity leave, Magdalena acquired a new profession, completing courses and practical training in reproductive medicine. Her clinic didn't yet have such a specialist, so her superiors approved and supported her ambition. Magdalena returned to work when Marta was just a year old. It was early, of course, but in their medical field, no one stayed home with children for long, and Magdalena needed the money. After all, she was a single mother and could rely only on herself. And everything seemed to be going well, just as Magdalena had planned and envisioned. But when her beloved daughter turned 2, Marta had her first attack. The girl screamed, writhing in the arms of her mother, who was terrified out of her mind. Magdalena immediately called an ambulance. The medics arrived quickly, but to the woman, the minutes of waiting felt like an eternity. It was unbearable to watch her daughter suffer. Marta was taken to the hospital and thoroughly examined. The verdict was disheartening: a serious diagnosis, very sick kidneys, a congenital pathology that had not been detected on the ultrasound because it developed over time. Now Marta needed serious and very expensive lifelong treatment. Magdalena was in despair. The medication for Marta cost as much as an airplane wing. Sure, she could turn to a fund, but the therapy was lifelong, and the fund would only cover part of the drugs. The lion's share of expenses would still fall on her shoulders. This is where Magdalena's new profession came in handy. It turned out that reproductive medicine was a very profitable business, with additional bonuses if handled skillfully. For example, scaring a patient who had dreamed of having a child for many years with complications and taking money from her for supposedly necessary treatment. Magdalena was taking a big risk. She could be exposed at any moment, but she repeatedly took this step for her daughter, for Marta. Now Magdalena regretted that Marta's father was a donor. If she had known the father, he could have helped with money and possibly donated a kidney to the child. Magdalena herself was not a match for Marta. She had been tested multiple times, and the wait list for a donor was so long that it was unthinkable. At best, Marta would get her kidney at adulthood, or later, but she needed to survive until then. The situation was complicated by Marta's rare blood type, a gift from her unknown father. She had very few matches. There was another option, surgery abroad. They would find a donor quickly and perform the surgery excellently, but for a hefty price. The quoted amount made Magdalena clutch her head. Even if she sold her apartment, car, and took out loans, it still wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't even be half the amount. So, Magdalena, gritting her teeth, bit the bullet and extracted money from her patients. After all, she had once dreamed of helping people, making them happy, which was why she went into medicine in the first place. By the way, Magdalena tried to perform her job impeccably. She took on the most challenging cases and fulfilled the cherished wishes of infertile women, helping them become mothers. Magdalena consoled herself that she was bringing them happiness, doing everything for the well-being of these families, and there was nothing wrong with the fact that the price for this was slightly higher than expected. After all, it was all for Marta, and her clients weren't exactly poor. Those in need couldn't afford the services of their center. Marta grew up, but she was different from other children. Her illness showed. The girl was very thin, pale, and tired quickly. She had almost no friends. Who would want to play with a friend who couldn't climb a tree or run around and tag? When Marta turned 7, her condition sharply deteriorated. Her sick kidneys could no longer cope with their function even with the serious medications that Magdalena regularly procured for her daughter. The girl was admitted to the hospital. First to a regular ward, and then it came to the ICU. Magdalena was beside herself, her thoughts only on her daughter, her heart uneasy, but she had to work. She couldn't afford to lose her income because Marta now needed even more expensive medications. Only surgery can save your daughter, Marta's doctor said, shrugging. Or a miracle. You know as a colleague that miracles do happen. Magdalena nodded. She had indeed witnessed miracles more than once, pregnancies occurring in seemingly hopeless cases, newborns born without a pulse coming to life under the hands of a neonatologist. But these occurrences were rare, and Magdalena couldn't rely on a miracle when it came to her only child. She had a chance to save Marta. She could get the money. At this critical moment, Magdalena was treating a very unusual patient, Lorena, tall, stately, striking, always flamboyantly dressed, always with makeup. This lady clearly loved attention. She didn't look like a woman desperate to conceive naturally. Magdalena was even surprised when this person first appeared in her office. Then Lorena surprised her even more. She confidently walked over to Magdalena's desk, sat in the chair opposite her, crossed her legs, and said, "I need a child from my husband, definitely. My husband is already dead. I need his heir, a boy, of course, preferably. You can choose the gender here, right? I'll pay, of course." Magdalena initially thought that Lorena loved her husband so much that she wanted to have a child in memory of him, to see in the baby the features of her beloved, hence asking for a boy, as boys often resemble their fathers more. Magdalena then decided she was not good at judging people. At first glance, Lorena seemed self-centered, unpleasant, even repulsive, but here she was capable of such feelings. However, when the conversation resumed, it turned out there was another reason. Lorena wanted to have a child from her husband not out of passionate feelings for her deceased spouse. It turned out the child was simply a means to secure an inheritance. All of her husband's property was registered to his mother. The man thought it was safer that way. Why, Lorena didn't delve into something related to competitors, taxes, and similar matters. Her mother-in-law considered Lorena a complete stranger, never liked her, and Lorena lied to her mother-in-law, saying she was expecting her son's child, an heir. The old woman immediately softened, Lorena said with an unpleasant grin. She even called me daughter, happy that someone would remain on earth from her son, and said that as soon as the grandson was born, she would immediately transfer everything to me and the baby. But the problem is, I'm not pregnant. That's why I'm here. Why don't you just conceive naturally and then present the child to your mother-in-law? What if the baby doesn't look like my husband? And who knows with her, she's cunning, she might even do a DNA test. No, I want IVF. While my husband was sick, they took biomaterial from him before treatment, so I have everything. I really will have a baby from my husband after his death, as creepy as that sounds. Yeah, it really did sound creepy. Magdalena pondered. She didn't really want to take on this case, but Lorena offered her a substantial reward if it worked out. And Magdalena desperately needed the money for Marta. So, she agreed. Lorena got pregnant only on the third attempt. This was the last chance. Magdalena was very afraid that the embryo wouldn't take, and she wouldn't see any money from Lorena, and there were no more embryos left. But the third attempt was successful. The pregnancy took. However, Lorena refused to follow the doctor's recommendations. Magdalena felt that the woman hated the baby inside her. The baby limited her in what she enjoyed so much: expensive drinks, travels, parties. I feel like a bloated barrel, Lorena complained. I can't wait for him to be born. I'm tired of this. Magdalena remained silent. Lorena irritated her, evoking dislike with her constant whining and, of course, her attitude toward the baby she was carrying. Magdalena saw no love for the baby, no concern for him from Lorena. None of the feelings that mothers usually have for their children. No, Lorena saw the son only as a source of income. This person was just a means to an end for her, and it was frightening. But, of course, Magdalena didn't show her golden patient her feelings. She smiled politely at Lorena, demonstrated friendliness and interest. Too much was at stake. If Lorena gave birth to the child and carried the pregnancy to term, Magdalena would get a lot of money. Marta's operation could be done. Part of the amount for the girl's treatment was raised by a fund, but the collection was not yet closed, and the fee from Lorena would cover the missing amount. Marta would be healthy. For this, Magdalena was ready to endure everything, not just the whims of an unpleasant patient. Lorena's pregnancy didn't go too well. It wasn't surprising given her attitude. Magdalena tried to get her patient into the right mindset, but the woman still didn't have any warm feelings for the baby inside her. And children, even the very small ones, understand everything, feel everything. Magdalena had seen this many times in her practice. Here there was complete indifference to the son, as a person, as an individual, as a child. Lorena had never loved her husband. Magdalena quickly realized this. She had to talk a lot with Lorena. The woman shared details of her life with her doctor. Lorena found her husband repulsive. She was almost glad when he was gone, dreaming of finally living the way she wanted, on her deceased husband's money, of course. And then such a surprise. Everything was registered to his mother, to the mother-in-law, who, of course, unlike her son, clearly saw her daughter-in-law's attitude toward her husband and understood everything. And so the mother-in-law set the condition: there will be a grandchild, there will be money. For the sake of the inheritance, Lorena suffered first from toxicosis, then from abdominal pains and backaches. The child himself was an extra burden for her, but without him, there would be no wealth. The last ultrasound did not please Magdalena at all. Everything indicated that premature birth was possible. Lorena was lying on the couch and, as usual, complaining about her fate in general and about this traumatizing situation in particular. The woman felt very sorry for herself, presenting herself almost as a heroine. Magdalena listened with half an ear. At first, the whining was irritating. as usual. But then it wasn't about that. Magdalena realized the situation was very unpleasant. The pregnancy was at risk. All right, Lorena, you'll have to stay in the hospital under observation for a while. We need to put you on an 4 drip. And you need to avoid any unnecessary movements. You need to rest. How? Lorena was astonished. What hospital stay? I have a meeting with my friends at a restaurant today. It's Morris's birthday. Famous artists will be performing. They haven't told us who, it's a surprise. You have a risk of premature labor, and the baby is still very immature, his lungs haven't formed yet. He is also lagging a bit in development for his term due to hypoxia. No, you can't leave here. Lorena lamented for a long time, complained about her fate, and even cursed the baby, as if he had deliberately caused her such trouble. Magdalena barely contained herself. No, she couldn't ruin her relationship with Lorena, otherwise, Lorena might refuse to pay the agreed-upon reward. They had an unofficial agreement. For keeping the secret and fudging the pregnancy terms, Magdalena was promised a substantial bonus. Magdalena was taking a risk, of course, but she knew what she was doing it for. She couldn't ruin everything because of a sudden surge of emotions. After all, she was a professional. Magdalena's next shift was a few days after Lorena finally agreed to stay in the hospital. The patient was openly bored, complaining more and more about feeling unwell and being in a bad mood. Following the established tradition, Magdalena tried to calm the capricious lady and cheer her up. To do this, she only needed to frequently remind Lorena of the true goal of all her suffering. Incidentally, when you think about it, their goal was the same: money. No matter how hard Magdalena tried to prolong Lorena's pregnancy, it didn't work. Labor began at a critically early term. The experienced doctor understood perfectly well that the baby, especially in such a state, was unlikely to survive. And stopping labor after the water had broken was also impossible. Goodbye, dream of surgery for Marta. All of this was in vain: the hours of persuading Lorena, the manipulation of documents, and the colossal effort to maintain this precious pregnancy. Anger and despair, these were the emotions Magdalena felt as she went up to Lorena in the delivery room. Seeing the capricious patient in a miserable state, Magdalena felt pity for her for the first time. The pain, the wild pain, was doubling the woman over. And yet, most likely, all these efforts were futile. The baby was unlikely to survive. But it was better for Lorena not to know this yet. Magdalena calmly examined Lorena, calmly told her what to do and how to behave. Strangely enough, the woman obediently complied. Magdalena watched as her plans and hopes crumbled, tears welling up in her eyes. How else could she help her daughter? Where could she get the money? Marta had another attack just the other day, right in the ICU while on heavy medication. The drugs were no longer helping. Surgery was urgently needed. Magdalena had been counting on holding out for just another month or so until Lorena's baby was born. She would receive the needed sum and pay for the surgery. And now, what to wait for? A miracle, as Marta's doctor advised? Are you crying? Lorena was surprised. This question brought Magdalena back to reality. Yes, tears had indeed welled up in her eyes. What's wrong? Lorena continued to worry. Did something happen? Something with my baby or with me? Of course, Lorena displayed her incredible selfishness as always. This woman seemed to think the entire world revolved around her. No, you must be mistaken, Magdalena shook her head. I just didn't get enough sleep today, but don't worry, I'll do everything possible to make sure you and your baby are fine. Well, you better. It's in your best interest, Lorena smirked. This was a brief interval between contractions when she wasn't feeling any pain. An obstetric nurse rushed into the delivery room. Senora Perez, the girl in the second delivery room, has started labor. The one with the twins. Let Malia handle it. You see, I'm busy with the delivery here. But your patient still has some time, the nurse noted. And things are progressing quickly in the other room. Malia Ortiz can't leave her current case either. Lorena, your dilation is still minimal, Magdalena addressed her golden patient. I need to step out. As soon as I'm done, I'll be right back with you. In the second delivery room, things were indeed close to the end. A very young mother and already twins. So fragile and thin, how did she carry her babies to this term? With such a delicate build, it was unlikely she could go to full term, especially with twins. Magdalena delivered the boy first. An experienced eye immediately noticed that the boy was healthy, proper physique, good skin color, a strong voice, premature but strong and sturdy. He would not only survive, but he would also grow to be a very handsome and athletic boy. Possibly even a champion. Magdalena couldn't help but smile, looking at this healthy baby, and suddenly a thought struck her. This child was premature, and so was Lorena's son. Both boys. If something happened to Lorena's baby during birth, which was very likely, they could just swap the infants. No one would notice. No one would even suspect anything was amiss. The nurse and neonatologists began praising the baby out loud. Magdalena stopped them, just in case she had to execute the plan that had just formed in her mind. She didn't allow the young mother to see her son, this fragile girl lying on the couch, because mothers often recognize their babies even if they see them accidentally in someone else's arms. No, it was better not to risk it. She'll have plenty of time to admire her son later, Magdalena said sternly. She still has to work hard to deliver the second baby. Following the boy, a girl was born. She was much weaker but had good chances for survival. Magdalena realized this immediately. The girl was taken to the ICU, and the boy to the neonatal intensive care unit. The young mother, fortunately, fell asleep from the stress, pain shock, and blood loss. She would be fine too. After finishing up in the second delivery room, Magdalena hurried back to Lorena, just in time. She had started pushing. Magdalena prayed silently that Lorena's son would be strong enough. Sometimes ultrasounds are wrong, and quite often. Of course, Magdalena didn't want to swap the babies. Not only was it a serious crime, but there was also a high risk of ending up in prison if it was discovered. It was also morally challenging. How could she live knowing she had done such a thing? Lorena's baby was born very weak, bluish skin tone, swelling, though he had gained a good weight. Magdalena noted that Lorena's son was approximately the same weight as the boy from the twin delivery. It was a very fortunate coincidence, which meant there would be fewer questions and suspicions from the staff. Magdalena also saw that the child was unlikely to survive. He seemed so lifeless, as if he didn't want to stay in this world. It was understandable. The poor baby must have sensed from the beginning that he was not wanted by his mother or anyone else. Magdalena carefully wrapped the baby in a blanket. "I'm taking him to the ICU," said the neonatologist, reaching for the baby. Magdalena shook her head. "I'll take care of him myself. You should go to the third delivery room. A woman there is about to give birth. They detected a pathology in the fetus at the last ultrasound. You're needed there." "What's wrong with him?" A weakened Lorena propped herself up on her elbows on the couch. "Why isn't he crying? Is he dead?" "He's alive," Magdalena answered uncertainly, "but very weak." "Pull him through," Lorena screamed. "Save this boy, or you won't get any money, and neither will I. I don't want all this suffering to be for nothing." Magdalena nodded. It only just hit her that she had made a mistake in thinking the baby was alive. He was born already dead. But Lorena couldn't know this. She couldn't know. Magdalena acted on autopilot. The entire staff was busy. Fortunately, several deliveries were happening simultaneously at the medical center that day. Magdalena rushed into the intensive care unit with Lorena's baby, took the twin boy from the incubator, placed Lorena's quiet, already cooling son in his place, and then, with a pounding heart, rushed to the ICU. She placed the twin baby, who didn't actually need intensive care, in the empty incubator. Ironically, the baby ended up next to his sister. A boy and a girl, they looked so much alike. For non-professionals, all babies looked the same. But Magdalena saw babies differently. She noted that these brother and sister would be beautiful and very, very similar to each other, like two peas in a pod. It could have been a wonderful family, but now these babies were together in the ICU for the first and probably last time, and then they would go to different families. The young mother, Daniela, fell into hysterics when she found out what had happened to her son, which was to be expected. She wailed, cried, and screamed that she didn't believe it. Magdalena tried to calm her. Magdalena's heart bled as she watched this girl suffering, but she reassured herself Daniela was still very young. She would have time to have a son and a daughter later if she wanted. But for Magdalena, this was the last chance to save her daughter. There were no other options for Marta. The staff didn't notice the swap. They were surprised, of course, that a seemingly healthy baby had suddenly not survived, but such things happened with premature infants. On the other hand, they were happy for Lorena's baby. Everyone had seen that the boy was almost a lost cause, but look, he pulled through. Such things also happened in the center's walls from time to time. Lorena looked like a victor. "We did it," she rejoiced. "Senora Perez, you'll get everything as soon as my mother-in-law transfers the inheritance to us and the baby." As agreed. Magdalena smiled too. If only Lorena and everyone else knew how much it cost her to keep up appearances. Time passed. Daniela was discharged with her daughter. The young mother never recovered from her loss during her time in the hospital. It was painful for Magdalena to see the agony in her eyes. Even her husband, so handsome and young, looked distraught, although he tried to stay strong. It was Magdalena who had brought this grief into their family, a doctor they had trusted. Lorena, on the other hand, was discharged with great fanfare. Her mother-in-law organized a grand welcome for her grandson, balloons, flowers, and entertainers. Magdalena was rewarded with a generous sum in an envelope, a gracious thank you from the happy grandmother. It was understandable. She thought her son was lost forever, and now she had a part of him back. But no one knew, no one even suspected that this baby was a complete stranger to them. The money Magdalena received from Lorena's mother-in-law was used to organize the transportation of sick Marta to another country. The girl's condition had become critical. Lorena kept her promise. As soon as she received the inheritance, she transferred the agreed fee to Magdalena. Magdalena immediately contacted the clinic, scheduled Marta's surgery, and began preparing for the trip. Marta underwent surgery, and it was successful. The girl quickly recovered. The dreadful attacks no longer tormented her. Her pale skin turned pink, her cheeks gained color, and Marta found strength and interest in life. Soon, she was walking hand in hand with her mother around the hospital yard. They talked and even laughed. Magdalena couldn't believe her happiness. Her daughter was alive and healthy. Soon, she would be no different from her peers. She would go to school, pursue her long-desired drawing, maybe even try sports or dancing, or whatever she wished. Amid this immense relief and joy, Magdalena almost stopped blaming herself for the swap. At times, she even felt she had done a huge favor to everyone involved. That young girl who had given birth to twins, how could she handle two babies at once? She was still a child herself. And financially, her Green family wasn't doing well, as Magdalena understood. They could go for a second child once they were on their feet. And Lorena, she was happy too. She needed the inheritance, she got it, and a healthy, beautiful son as a bonus. Her mother-in-law seemed rejuvenated, adoring her grandson. And what did it matter that he wasn't biologically hers? The main thing was that everyone was happy. The boy himself was also in a better situation. He was in a wealthy family, getting so much from Lorena: toys, travel, development opportunities. He was living in luxury. Would he have received this in his biological family? Magdalena doubted it. What could poor students have given this baby? But there were times when Magdalena hated herself for what she had done. For years, she was tormented by guilt, and even seeing her healthy daughter didn't always save her from the agony. Though Magdalena fully acknowledged that she would have done the same if she could turn back time. Then, almost 6 years after the incident, everything was revealed. Accidentally, Lorena's mother-in-law decided to check the family using an innovative hematological test. It was then discovered that her beloved grandson, whom she had loved more than life all these years, had a blood type he couldn't possibly have. This raised suspicions, and the mother-in-law insisted on a DNA test. And then, the case didn't become sensational only because Lorena's influential mother-in-law didn't want any scandal, but she punished everyone involved. Magdalena was fired from the medical center and stripped of her right to practice medicine. Well, the woman even found it fair. She had often wondered if she had the right to continue working there after what she had done. Lorena also ended up with nothing. No, her mother-in-law didn't take away her house and car, but Lorena lost her monthly allowances and part of the inheritance. She was left, as she put it, with a stranger's child and no means to live on. But she exaggerated. It was Magdalena and Marta who were left without means. Lorena still had a lot, but she was used to a different life, one without financial restrictions. What now? She would have to get a job or find another wealthy man. But who would want her now? She wasn't young anymore, and she had a child who, as it turned out, wasn't even her own. Magdalena didn't know how Lorena resolved her problems. Did she manage to come to terms with raising someone else's son? Did she find a new source of income? Magdalena preferred to distance herself from that story. She got a job as a saleswoman in a store, made new acquaintances, and almost stopped sleeping. Her only ray of light remained her daughter Marta. Yes, they were struggling financially. Magdalena also suffered moral torments, but Marta was alive and healthy. She had a future and no more horrible attacks. Sometimes Magdalena wanted to call Lorena to find out how she was, what had happened to the boy, but she stopped herself each time. Firstly, Lorena was understandably angry at her. Maybe she should have told her the truth back in the delivery room. At least to her. Perhaps Lorena would have approved of Magdalena's plan. Most likely, she would have. That woman wanted to get the inheritance by any means, but knowing that the child wasn't her mother-in-law's biological grandchild, she wouldn't have allowed the hematological test to happen. Secondly, Magdalena was afraid to learn the truth about the boy's fate from Lorena. What if he was living a miserable life now? She didn't want to add that to her burden of guilt. No. Magdalena already carried a heavy load on her soul. She needed to take care of herself for her daughter's sake, for Marta. Everything was for her. Daniela, Esther, and Lucio were sitting in the cafe. The kids were chatting, smiling at each other, and swinging their legs in unison. Daniela was increasingly amazed by their physical resemblance and the invisible bond that clearly existed between them. Finally, she decided it was time to ask the boy some questions to clarify a few things. Lucio, where are your parents? I only have a mom, the boy immediately darkened, but she doesn't love me. Daniela's heart ached with pity for the child. The certainty and pain in his words were palpable. I don't know why she doesn't love me. I try so hard. I did the best in swimming for her, got first place, and I bring her good grades from preschool. They praise me, but she doesn't care. And now she decided to send me to an orphanage. What do you mean? Daniela was surprised. Just like that. She thought I didn't hear, but I heard her talking to them on the phone. They were supposed to come and take me away. That's why I ran away. So, you ran away from home? Yes, so they wouldn't take me to the orphanage. I know it's bad there. Everyone fights, and the caregivers hit you. I've seen it in movies and cartoons. I don't want to go there. I don't want to be hit. Wait, Daniela tried to calm the child. Why are you so sure that they'll send you to an orphanage? Maybe you misunderstood? You might be wrong. My mom never loved me, Lucio stubbornly repeated, staring into space. Sometimes I even think I'm not her real child. Why do you think that? We don't look alike at all. And I don't look like my dad either. I've seen his pictures. Real children are loved, but not me. Daniela felt an overwhelming urge to hug this unfortunate boy. His voice was filled with so much pain, resentment, and confusion. And recently, even my grandmother stopped loving me. I don't know why. She used to visit me all the time, give me gifts, take me with her, we'd go for walks and travel, and then it just stopped. That's strange, Esther chimed in. Very strange, Daniela agreed. Was this boy telling the truth? Or was he lying? Trying to gain their trust? Daniela knew that many children who periodically ran away from home had vivid imaginations and a knack for persuasion. Maybe Lucio was one of them, playing on their pity to get fed and then disappearing like the wind, only to find another sympathetic mother-child pair to spin his tales. But what about the uncanny resemblance, the dreams, or maybe she was seeing what she wanted to see? Still unable to cope with Danilo's death, she might see her son in any boy who remotely resembled him. After all, she hadn't really seen her firstborn properly. She needed more information. Lucio, what do you plan to do next? Daniela asked. You can't just keep wandering around. What about school? And you need a place to sleep, something to eat. Maybe I should take you back to your mom? I'll explain everything to her. She won't scold you, I promise. She's probably worried already. Not to her, the boy tensed up. It seemed as if he was ready to bolt. She'll send me to the orphanage. I heard her. She thought I was too little to understand. My mom made a deal with a doctor to give me a diagnosis, saying I'm crazy. And then they'll send me to a special orphanage for kids like that. I don't want to go there. I'm scared. Tears welled up in Lucio's eyes. It was clear he was very confused and scared, truly not knowing what to do in this situation. That's awful, Daniela involuntarily clutched her heart. The child's words sent a chill through her chest. But isn't there any adult you can trust? No one. I used to think Grandma was an adult I could trust, but she and Mom had a big fight. Now Grandma doesn't even want to see me. I don't know why, I didn't argue with her. Maybe Mom told her I was crazy, and she believed it. What about neighbors, acquaintances, teachers, coaches? Do you think they would believe me? Lucio said with a bitter, adult-like smirk. Daniela realized the boy was right. Even she found it hard to believe his stories but he was indeed telling some incredible tales. If it weren't for Lucio's resemblance to Esther and, most importantly, those dreams where she saw her son looking exactly like Lucio, Daniela would have taken the child to the police by now, so they could find his mother. Listen, Esther and I were going to the toy store. Come with us, and we'll get you something if you want. I don't need toys, but I'd love to go with you. Daniela took Lucio and Esther by the hands and walked with them through the park. At that moment, she felt completely happy and at peace. She had forgotten that she could feel this way. Lucio felt familiar and close, very understandable. Daniela could read his thoughts, understand what he was feeling. Just like with Esther. It was amazing. Daniela talked with the children, they laughed a lot and joked. People looked at them with smiles. It was probably nice to see such a happy trio. Of course, Daniela thought about what to do next. Something needed to be decided. Lucio was in danger, but she couldn't think of a solution yet, so for now, she simply enjoyed the company of the two children. Daniela decided that after the walk, Lucio would come home with them. The children would watch cartoons with pizza and cocoa, and she would have a serious talk with her husband. Alfonso would understand her, especially when he saw Lucio, saw how much he resembled Esther. Her husband had always understood her, especially before the tragic events, so everything would work out now. If that wealthy mother wanted so much to get rid of her son that she was ready to label him mentally ill, let her give him to them. Of course, Lucio couldn't be their Danilo. Their son had died right after birth as a baby, he even had a grave. Daniela still couldn't visit that place. She sometimes went, but afterward, she felt empty and numb for a long time. So, Lucio was just a boy who looked very much like Esther. A child with a difficult fate who needed loving parents, caring adults, and they needed him. Alfonso had wanted a second child. Daniela was afraid to give birth again, but this way, Esther would have a twin brother, as nature had intended. Lucio said he had also just turned 7 and was supposed to start school in the fall. They would go together, sit at the same desk. Relatives and friends might not understand. But what did it matter to her and Alfonso? The main thing was they would have a son. This thought filled her with energy and joy. However, Daniela understood that it probably wouldn't be so easy. This mother of Lucio might not have actually planned to send him to a special orphanage. Maybe the child had misunderstood everything. And even if it were true, how could she approach the boy's mother and start that conversation? "Hello, you wrote a diagnosis for your unwanted and unloved son and planned to dump him in an orphanage? Why don't you let us take him instead?" Nonsense. The boy's mother wouldn't even talk to her. "I'm thirsty," Esther suddenly reminded her. "Mom, buy me a drink, and Lucio too." "Yes, I'm thirsty too," the boy admitted shyly. "All right then, let's stop by the grocery section before the toy store." Daniela smiled at the children. She loved feeling like the mother of two, a boy and a girl, twins. They entered the grocery section. Lucio chose a cola, and Esther picked lemonade. There was no line. The woman at the checkout was looking at them closely. Daniela was used to this. Many people watched them. They probably looked great together. The cashier reminded Daniela of someone. Well, that happened often. Nature had blessed her with a good memory for faces. However, she quickly forgot who those faces belonged to or under what circumstances they had met. "Daniela," the cashier gasped as Daniela handed her the children's bottles. "Is it really you?" "Well, yes," she nodded. "My name is Daniela. Do we know each other? Are these your children?" "The boy, you found him, didn't you?" "Oh my God, I'm so happy, you can't imagine." The cashier's eyes filled with tears, and her lips trembled. Daniela was completely confused. The children also looked at the cashier in bewilderment. "Ma'am, you must be mistaking me for someone else." Daniela shook her head. She wanted to get their purchases and leave quickly. The cashier seemed strange, maybe even crazy. She was scaring the children. "Are these your children?" "Both of them," the cashier persisted. "Yes," Esther suddenly answered, "we're twins." The girl said it proudly. Daniela understood her. She wanted people to think of them that way too. A mother and her 2 children. "Daniela, we need to talk. Maybe the children can play in the ball pit." "I don't mind," Esther replied immediately. Lucio nodded cautiously. The children, holding hands, ran towards the huge ball pit filled with bright balls. The cashier stepped out from behind the counter and approached Daniela. "Let's go over there, where there's a bench. It's comfortable for talking." "Okay," agreed a bewildered Daniela. A sticky, cold fear churned in her stomach. The cashier seemed unpleasant for some reason, although she had an attractive appearance and spoke quite friendly. "You didn't recognize me," the cashier stated as they settled on the comfortable bench. "I'm Magdalena Perez, the doctor who delivered your baby 7 years ago." Daniela murmured. Now she truly remembered why the cashier's face had seemed so familiar. "All these years, I have been tormented by what I did," Senora Perez continued. "I kept remembering your eyes, black with grief, thinking about your baby. I'm glad you found each other. I just want to know how it happened." "What do you mean?" "This boy, isn't he your son?" "Actually, no," Daniela admitted. "We met him on the street. The child was in a difficult situation. Honestly, I'm confused." "But it's Lucio," Magdalena said. "I couldn't be mistaken." I've been monitoring Lorena's social media all this time. I wanted to make sure the boy was okay. Yes, he said his name is Lucio, and his mother's name is Lorena, Daniela confirmed. So you know the boy? You know his parents? Magdalena's knowledge was frightening. Daniela's thoughts were racing like startled birds. She had almost immediately felt that Lucio was not a stranger. But that was just intuition. Now there was Senora Perez too. Daniela, I don't understand how Lucio ended up on the street. He's usually well looked after. I'm even more surprised that you met, saw each other, and are now together. You have no idea how surprised I am by all this, and I don't understand anything at all. I'll tell you everything. I need to unburden my soul, and you need the truth. It's not an easy truth. It will change the life of your entire family, but it can no longer be hidden. And Magdalena told Daniela everything about her daughter Marta's illness, the desperation that drove an honest and decent person to a monstrous act, and the swapping of the babies. Daniela listened, hanging on every word. Indeed, her world was changing before her eyes. It was frightening, painful, and hurtful, but also joyful. Danilo was alive, healthy, and beautiful, and he was even with her now. True, his name was Lucio now, but that was okay. It was also a good name, like a king's. Lucio and Esther. Even their names sounded perfect together. You can sue me now, Magdalena lowered her head. I deserve it. Moreover, I am ready for it. Especially since my confession will be necessary for Lucio to be recognized as your son. The court needs to sort everything out. I'll tell them everything, tell them how it was, and receive my deserved punishment. My sister will take care of Marta in the meantime. I've planned for this. As for proving the relationship, it's very easy today. A DNA test. Magdalena was actively making plans to return Lucio to his biological family while Daniela's head was spinning. She was in a state close to shock, and yet she managed to feel joy. Alfonso and Lucio sat on the pier, their bare feet dangling in the water as they fished. Behind them, Esther and Daniela played badminton. The family was enjoying a getaway at a country resort. Alfonso couldn't get time off work in the summer, so they didn't travel far, instead renting a cabin for the weekend, and it was great. Now they were a family. Strong, loving, and real. Lucio had entered their lives as if he had never left, as if he had always been with them. The twins finished first grade with good grades. As Daniela had dreamed on the very first day she met Lucio, the children went to the same class. By the fall, all the court battles were behind them, and Lucio officially became the son of Daniela and Alfonso. Magdalena Perez was not imprisoned. Daniela herself advocated for leniency for the doctor, and her request was granted. Daniela understood and forgave Magdalena, as strange as it may seem. Yes, this woman had caused them unbearable pain. Lucio was also traumatized. It was no small matter to grow up with a woman who did not accept or love him and then face the ordeal of the orphanage. As it turned out, Lorena had indeed arranged for a false diagnosis for the child because she couldn't and didn't want to raise someone else's child. She was planning to start a new life. The child was not needed. It became clear that she couldn't simply give up her son to the orphanage, but if there was a disease, then it was a different story. So Lorena followed the well-trodden path, bribing doctors and giving money where necessary. The clever boy figured everything out. He overheard some things and figured out the rest on his own. And he ran away, understanding that once he was behind the gates of the orphanage for sick children, there would be no way out. Fortunately, Lucio accidentally met Esther in the park. The children became friends, and then Esther called her mother for help. "I caught one. I caught one." Lucio's joyful shout broke the silence of the Sunday morning. "You're a champion," Alfonso praised his son. "Esther and I will put it in the aquarium, right, Mom?" "This little carp." "Whatever you want," Daniela shrugged. "We'll put it in," the twins exclaimed in unison. Alfonso and Daniela exchanged smiles. They still weren't used to their children often saying or doing the same thing simultaneously. Twins. Royal twins. A son and a daughter. Lucio and Esther.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.